as we just watched the video, uh, hopefully you all have a good long weekend, holiday weekend. Enjoy your time, whatever you may be doing, even if it's just sitting at home relaxing. Enjoy some sunshine and the warmth, but take a moment and remember the video. Remember what it is. The whole reason we do have a day off tomorrow is to kind of remember and memorialize those that have served, that have gone off and to wars and battles and didn't come back. So, tell thank you to God for those that have sacrificed, and remember that in the middle of your hamburger or barbecue chicken or whatever you're going to do tomorrow, and take a second for that. And before we do get started too, I'm going to take it one more time and remind you VBS is coming up real soon, a month away. We need help. If you can volunteer in any way, we would appreciate it. You probably walked by it when you walked in. There's some sign-up sheets that you can sign up to volunteer for something. There's a ton of stuff that needs to be done. If you're looking at those sign-up sheets and nothing seems like something that you can do or that you would be able to be interested in, come talk to me. We can find you a spot to fill in. There's all kinds of stuff. Even if all you can do is sit down and talk to a visitor or a parent who's dropped off their kids and share God with them or pray with them or something. We need people for all kinds of stuff. So if you could sign up for some of those things, that'd be great. If not, let me know. We'll get you a spot, a way that you can help out and be a part of it and be a part of giving the gospel out to these kids. So invite people, neighbors, kids, grandkids, whatever is around you. Encourage someone to come out. So today, we're going to be reading, Glenn read for you Psalm 13 earlier. We're going to be going through that. And say, have there ever had a time where you felt like you were just alone, by yourself, totally alone? That there might have been people around you. There might have been a lot of people who were there, but you just didn't feel like they were actually there. You know what I mean? Where you need something, you need help, you are feeling lonely, you're feeling like there isn't anyone there. And even though you might be surrounded by a lot of people, that you're just feeling alone, and that there's whatever it is you're going through, no one else could understand it. No one else would be able to relate to what it is. You're in the middle of some kind of storm in your life, and you're looking around and you're looking for someone or anyone that you can grab a hold to as a lifeline, that you can say, I need some help, but someone's got to be there that can help me out. And you're looking around, and it seems like there's no one there. When we're in those times, we kind of feel like that we're the only ones that could ever happen to. We get sucked into that, and we're feeling like there's no way someone else could be going through this that I'm going through. I've got to be the only one. This has got to be something that only I'm doing. But in reality, and I think if we're honest with ourselves, probably all of us have had times that we've gone through that at one time or another, in one way or another. Now, as I said, we're going to be reading Psalm 13. If you're going through the Psalms, a lot of times you feel like, and especially some of the well-known ones, they're the ones that are praising God and giving thanksgiving to God. But when you go through it, you see there's a lot of different kinds of Psalms, actually. And really, the book of Psalms is a collection of different songs and poems and things like that different authors have wrote, and they've all been compiled together into this one book. As I said, some are praising God and thanking Him for great things He's done and for who He is. Some are expressing a confidence and a trust in God. I trust you, God, and I know you're going to be there for me. And some are lifting Him up as the King of all and sovereign over all and the creator of the universe. Amen. But when you go through them, and I've been reading some of the Psalms recently, and for some reason these are some of the ones that have been standing out to me recently. There's these other ones that actually express pain and struggle and emotions, and they're sometimes called lament psalms or psalms of lament. And it stood out to me how much there really is in the psalms like this, where the author, whoever it is going through some really emotional and painful times. And as you read them, and some of them have a nice ending. They've expressed these painful times and this ending, okay, but everything worked out okay. But some of them you go through and you read them, and they don't. It's just this song or a poem where the author is just expressing he's struggling. And at that moment in time, he's really having a hard time. A lot of them actually, if you're going to break them down in the categories, they might fit into more than one category, and this one, chapter 13, probably is one of those. But lament, this expression of emotion and pain and struggle, I think is one of the categories you could fit in here. And the journey that David, who wrote this one, he's the author of this psalm, the journey that he goes through in these short 6 verses, I think tell us a really important story. Amen. And David is someone that a lot of us are familiar with. David and Goliath, that's the story. When you're a kid growing up in church, that's a story that you always learn about every year. And even people who don't go to church, they know that story. It's used as an example. The word Goliath sometimes is used to say something big and insurmountable. So we know David, we hear about him, and he was the king of Israel. And David is the author of a lot of psalms. In fact, he's authored more than anyone else by a wide margin. And it's possible maybe he was just one of those guys that this was how he kind of expressed himself and processed himself, is probably through songs or poems, and things like that. So he wrote a lot of these psalms, and all kinds of different ones. And David is not a stranger to difficulties and trials and problems in his life. And we talked about Goliath, and that's a story we know about. And it certainly was a difficulty. It's one that had a good ending to it. But before he goes out to battle, when he comes to King Saul, who was the king before him, he comes to King Saul and says, I'll go out there and I'll battle Goliath. And he tells King Saul about how, while he was watching his father's sheep, which was his job at the time, how there was a lion and a bear that came to take the sheep, and he was able to fight them off. Not an easy thing to do, I'm sure. Not something that most of us would want to do. And I think, in fact, if a lot of us were in that position, we'd be say, sorry, sheep, I'm going to get myself to safety. But he fought them off. But then after that, after defeating Goliath, and he spent time, he worked in King Saul's court. And David became very popular. And David was a powerful military leader in battle. And he became very popular, and people started really praising David. And King Saul was like, well, wait a second. I'm the king. You're just some guy. People should be praising me, not you. And King Saul turns on David. And King Saul gets to the point where he is trying to kill David. If he were to get his hands on him, he was going to kill David. And David has to go on the run. He has to be on the run, to stay alive, to keep himself away from Saul. And David's wife, who happened to be Saul's daughter, Saul takes away from him and gives his daughter to another man to be his wife. David has to take some of his family and move them into under the rule of another nearby nation to keep them safe. He's running, he's in the wilderness and caves trying to find somewhere to live, and eventually has to go to the Philistines to stay with them for protection for a while. He's exiled from his own country. And we don't know exactly how long. The Bible doesn't tell us exactly how long. Depending on the scholar or people who you look at, some people might say this was a relatively short time. Some people might say this could have even been as long as 7, 8, 9, 10 years that he's on the run and exiled. So not an easy thing to go through, not something that any of us would want to go through. But then, after that, after King Saul dies, we know David is the next king, and a lot of times we think, okay, he became king, things must have been good then. Well, actually, if you look at the account and the stories in the Bible, he has to battle it out with one of Saul's sons for 7.5 years for the throne. His one son is saying, no, I'm the king's son, I should be king. And David's like, well, God anointed me and told me I'm going to be king. For 7.5 years, he's trying to figure this out and battle this out. And eventually he gets through as the king over the whole country. But then he runs into his mistakes and trials of his own doing. And one of the most well-known instances is when he sins with Bathsheba, and Bathsheba's married to another man, and David conceives a child with Bathsheba. And because of that, God, through prophet Nathan, comes to him and says that this baby that Bathsheba has is going to die. And your family is going to have constant battles and violence in it because of this. It's going to keep going. And some of David's other sons, in fact, one of David's other sons goes in and assaults his half-sister. And then because of that, a different son eventually comes and kills his brother because of that. And then that son who killed his brother eventually tries to overthrow David, his father, tries to lead a coup against his father and try to overthrow him. And then that son eventually dies. So David has a lot of problems and things that he has to go through in his life, and trials that he's going through and problems that he's going through. But in spite of all this, and many of us have heard it, that God in different places calls David a man after God's own heart, a man after my own heart. And one of the reasons I picked the psalm we're going to read is because I think it shows a good example of what this actually means. And as we look at the psalm in verses 1 and 2, and it starts out, and David writes this: "How long wilt thou forget me, O Lord? Forever? How long wilt thou hide thy face from me? How long shall I take counsel in my soul, having sorrow in my heart daily? How long shall my enemy be exalted over me?" So we don't know exactly what it was that David is reacting to, but I think we can safely say this is something that is weighing very heavily on him. It's something that he's really struggling with. He's crying out to God and pleading with him and saying, "God, where are you? You've left me here. Where you have forgotten about me. You're hiding from me. God, what's going on? I need you, God. You're not here." He's feeling lonely. He feels abandoned, hopeless, helpless. Like he's got nothing he can do, nowhere he can go. He's feeling like he is the only one there, and he has no idea what to do next. That God has gone somewhere, and he's been left behind to try to deal with his problems by himself without God. And I think this is a situation that, again, if we're honest with ourselves, we probably have all been there, where you felt like that, where God has left you and God has abandoned you. And you're saying, "God, you said you're going to be there, but where are you? You're not here. I can't find you. Where did you go?" Sometimes when we have things like that going on in our life, when we have those feelings, I think that we feel like we can't be honest with God about it, about those feelings we're having, and about how the emotions that we're feeling right now. We try to tiptoe around it and not admit it to God that we're feeling that way, and we feel like he's left us. And part of it is probably you feel like we should have a respect and honor for God and a fear of God, and that's good. We should have that. But at the same time, God is the creator. God created us. God knows who we are and knows what we're going through. And God knows that we're having those feelings. Why do we feel like we need to hide them from God and not admit them? God already knows. God knows that we're feeling like that. God knows what we're going through. He, again, is the creator. He's all everywhere. He knows all. He knows everything about us. And he knows that when we're struggling and we're going through those things. We have this knowledge in our head that we know that God says he's going to be with us, but then what we're experiencing is something different, that it feels like he's not. And here's the thing, I don't really think it's necessarily wrong to have those feelings sometimes. Those feelings come up and they happen to us. And we have those emotions and we get in these times and we feel like we're alone and abandoned. And that's okay to feel like that sometimes. Those things happen through life. Life is difficult. Okay? You may not be David, who you're on the run for your life from a king, but you have your own struggles and issues and things that you're going through when it's difficult. And instead of trying to hide them from God, and instead of trying run away from God and push them away from God and pretend that they're not there. In fact, I would say what we should be doing when we're having those times is running straight to God and going right to Him instead of running away. See, Satan takes these times like these and he twists them all up and he tries to deceive us and get us confused. And he tries to make us feel like we're the only ones, as we were saying before, that we're lonely, that we're abandoned, that God's not there, that there's no one else, anyone else who could ever understand what we're going through. And that he makes us feel like that we're not worthy to go back to God, that we might as well go anywhere else and head out on our own because there's no way we could go back to God after the feelings that we just had. But it's not true. That's Satan trying to deceive us. That's him trying to get us away from God. And we have these emotions sometimes, and we have these feelings, and a feeling like we are abandoned, that we're lost, that we can't find God, just like David. God, where are you? You got to be here somewhere. I can't do this without you. So going back to David, how he's a man after God's own heart, you might be thinking, okay, well, how could God ever describe him like that when he's having these feelings? When he feels like that God's not even there and God has left him and God has forgotten about him. Well, the next two verses in verses 3 and 4 starts to show us why I think we can look at it that way. If you look in 3 and 4, David says this, "Consider and hear me, O Lord my God. Lighten mine eyes, lest I sleep the sleep of death. Lest mine enemies say, I have prevailed against him, and those that trouble me rejoice when I am moved." So instead of taking those feelings of abandonment and loneliness and helplessness, like we said, and instead of turning from God and running, instead he goes right to God, and he says, God, you got to help me. I need you. And he's pleading with God and begging with God that God would be there and that God would intervene in whatever it is that's affecting him right now. He's calling to God and saying, God, I need your help. You've got to come here now because I can't do it alone. And I think this could be a blueprint that we can follow in our lives. When we have those times where we feel like God has left us, or we feel like we don't know what to do, and we feel like there's no hope, don't fall for that trap that Satan's trying to get us to go away. Instead, call out to him. Say, God, you're the only one that can do it. You got to come here and you got to help me out. Don't let whatever it is that's trying to overtake me have victory. Overtake them, God. Take over the situation. Bring me through it and bring me victory. Don't let my enemies win. Now, we said we feel like sometimes we can't be honest, but we got to remember, see, God created us to have a relationship with us. Yes, God, as we said, is the creator, and we should honor and respect him, and he's made us, and he's made the whole world, and he's all-powerful. But he made us to have a relationship with us, and he made us, each one of you, uniquely made by God, and he desires to have a personal relationship with each and every one of you. God uses a lot of different examples in the Bible to kind of show us what that relationship is supposed to look like, because it's a very unique relationship. It can't be replicated by anything else that we can experience in this world. It's unique between you and God, each one of us. But God uses some examples in the Bible to try to show us, and he uses different things in different ways so that when we put them all together, we can kind of start to get a fuller picture of it. And one of those ways is he uses the example of a father and a child. And in fact, we say sometimes God the Father. Or when we accept God into our lives, we say we become a child of God, or we're in God's family. So if you look at that relationship, as many of you probably have children. If you don't, at least you've been a child yourself, so you probably understand some of it. But when that child is born, it's a little baby. And that baby has to have everything done for him or her. You as the parent have to feed it. You have to change it. You have to provide for it. You have to keep it warm. You have to put it to bed. You have to give it things to do and take it to the doctor to make sure it's healthy. And you have to do everything as the parent for that baby. But that baby grows and gets older and it becomes a child. And eventually you start to teach that baby some things, who's now a child. And you start to teach the child how to become a little more independent and how to do some things on their own and how to learn some things. And eventually that child gets older and older and they become an adult. And hopefully, if you've done a good job, that child and is now an adult can go out into the world and kind of make their own way in the world. Next week we're celebrating 2 high school graduates who that's kind of a transition point as they're starting to go out into the world. But as they go out into the world, as all of you are well aware, there are struggles that happen and things that you don't know what to do and problems that come up. And sometimes your child may come back to you when they're an adult because they're in some really serious, legitimate problems. They don't know what to do. And they may come to you for advice or guidance or help in some way. And if it's actually a real problem, you as a parent are probably willing to help them out. And in fact, are glad that you have a relationship with your child, that they're willing to come to you when they're struggling. And they're willing to come to you for some guidance. And it's the same with God. That's why he uses that example. When we first have God in our life, when we first accept him into our life, God describes us as being like babies in our spiritual life. And we have to rely on God for everything. God has to provide us and help us with all kinds of stuff. But as we mature in our relationship with God, we start to learn some things, and we learn how we can talk to him, and we learn how to listen to him, and we learn how to read the Bible and how to learn from it. And we learn how to trust him for some things, and then we learn that he's going to provide for us for things. But sometimes we have real problems, and we have to go to God, just like David did. And we have those very serious, very real feelings and emotions and problems, and we don't know what to do with them, and so we go to God. And we say, God, I need your help. And God wants that. He wants us to do that. He wants us to come to him when we really need it. Now, sometimes we do go to him for things that really we should be able to solve on our own. And sometimes when you feel like God's not answering you or God's ignoring you, maybe it's because it's something you need to figure out on your own. Back in November, we had to get a new fridge at our house. And the fridge that we had one of those water dispensers on the front door. And that was one of the things when we bought a new one, we said, yes, this is one of the things we definitely want. Because our 2 boys, who are 8 and 5, they come up and they say, Mom, Dad, I'm thirsty. And then we could say, well, okay, you have cups in the bottom drawer. Go get a cup, take it to the fridge, and get some water. You push the cup in there. They know how to do that. They can do that on their own and get their own water. See, that's a simple problem that they really don't need us to do. That's part of, like we said, teaching them to be independent and trying to help them grow. So when they come to me with that problem, they're thirsty, I have them solve that on their own. When we come to God with problems that we should be able to solve on our own, sometimes he's saying, you need to solve this on your own. But when the boys are outside, especially when it's nice and warm outside, and they're playing around and riding their bikes or their scooters, or they're playing with the boys down the street and wrestling and running and everything, and then they fall and they scrape their knees all up or their elbows all up and they're bleeding all over the place, I don't tell them, all right, you know where the Band-Aids are, get in the house and go clean yourself up. No, we go over there and we scoop them up while they're crying and hurting and bleeding, and we take them in the house and we get them cleaned up and we put the Band-Aids on there, give them a hug, tell them it's going to be okay, and then they can head back out and they're okay after that, and then they can go back and play with their friends. Right? So that's what God does. Sometimes there are the times where God says, this is something you need to handle on your own, but there's the times where God knows he needs to step in, and he wants us to come to him then in those times. We're not bothering God or annoying God or putting him out. He's created us to have that relationship. He wants to be there for you and help you out. He wants to be there, to be the one that you rely on in the times where no one else is there. And as we go to verses 5 and 6, this is what I find really interesting about it. David says, "But I have trusted in thy mercy. My heart shall rejoice in thy salvation. I will sing unto the Lord, because he hath dealt bountifully with me." So David is thanking God and praising God for the deliverance that God provides. But here's the catch. He's doing it before the deliverance has come. How do we know? Okay, now if you are a big grammar nerd, this part's for you. If you look at it, he says, "My heart shall rejoice in thy salvation." He says, "I will sing unto the Lord." So both of those are saying future. I'm going to do this thing. So he's saying that when you provide the deliverance, because I know you will, when that happens, my heart is going to rejoice, and I'm going to praise you and thank you for it. If it was some deliverance that had already occurred, then he would say something different. He would have said that my heart did rejoice. My heart rejoiced when in the salvation. Or I did sing, or I sang and thanked you for the deliverance. But no, he's saying that I'm going to do this. When the deliverance comes, I will do this. So he's thanking God for this deliverance, even though it hasn't come yet. Because he trusts God that it's going to come. And he knows that it's going to come. Even though a few verses before, he was saying, "God, where are you?" He's saying, now, God, I know you're going to provide it. Even though you seem like you're nowhere around now, I know that you're still going to be there for me and you're going to bring me through this. So to review how this worked, David trusted in God in the past, and he found that God provided in those times. Because if you look at the other parts of the verse, he said, "I have trusted in thy mercy." And then he says, "Because he hath dealt bountifully with me." So these are in the past. So the trials and the problems and the situations that he's had in the past, he's learned that if he trusted God, that he would bring him through those things. So now, in his current problem, he says, "God, I know you've done it in the past, and because I have that experience, and I've gone those things, I know you're going to bring me through this one too. And when you do, because I know you will, I'm going to praise you for it, and I'm going to rejoice in it." So, but some people might say, okay, but that's good and everything, that you learn that and God brings you through. But why would God even let a bad thing happen to you in the first place? Why even put you in these situations? Why can't God just make everything good for you? Well, sometimes God does things to test our faith or to teach us how to trust and rely on him. But if we can be honest, a lot of times these hard times and trials we're going through are the result of our own dumb mistakes and screw-ups, aren't they? It's the things that we've done that we shouldn't have been doing that put us in those situations. And in fact, I think that God has those times where he tests us and teaches us how to rely on him and allows some things allows us to go through some hard times, so that when we get to the point where we put ourselves in terrible positions because of our own mistakes and screw-ups, now we know how to trust God to get us through it and get us out of it because he's tested us with it before. Think about that father-child example again that we mentioned. Sometimes you have to let your child go through a difficult thing when it's a situation where you're in the control of it and you can keep them from getting in a real bad situation or getting hurt or something, don't you? And you do that so that they can learn. Ben, who's the 8-year-old, can remember very clearly when he was real young, probably less than 2 years old, and he kept trying to touch the TV, and we told him, you can't touch the TV, you need to stop, you're not allowed to do that, because if he's pushing on it and that TV falls down on top of him, he's going to get hurt. And so we kept telling him, no, don't touch the TV, you can't do that, and he kept wanting to do it. So after we gave him several warnings, we stopped. And he, one more time, he was staring right at me. And as he's staring at me to see what I'm going to do, he real slowly reached his finger like this, closer and closer to the TV, to see if I was going to say anything or not. And he reached out and he touched that TV. And so what did I have to do? Now I have to go and give him a punishment because he got several warnings and he was very clear on what the standard was, what the rule was. Don't touch the TV. And yet he did it anyway. So it's a situation where I was in control and I could make sure he was going to be safe, but yet I could still teach him a lesson and let him learn. So he needs to follow the rules that mom and dad give him. When mom and dad give a direction, you got to follow them. And so God does it. When it's a situation where God is in control and he can be there for us, he sometimes tests us and teaches us and lets us learn a lesson so that when we get to the hard times and the times where we've put ourselves in bad positions and we've screwed up and messed up, now we already have that experience we can fall back on and know, hey, God got me through some of these bad times before. He's going to get me through this bad time too. Just like David is saying, even though I know that deliverance hasn't come yet, I know that you will do it because you've done it before in the past. But we can't get to that point unless we go through some of the bad times and we learned about it and we've experienced some of it. So we talked about some of those trials and problems that David went through, and some of them weren't necessarily his fault. What can you do if a king decides he doesn't like you anymore and he wants to hunt you down and kill you, right? But other instances were directly because of something he did and times he messed up. We mentioned the sin and the issues with Bathsheba. So Bathsheba gets pregnant from David while she's married to someone else, and then there's a whole bunch of other problems that spiral out of it. And the Nathan prophet is sent by God to David to confront him and tell him, and as part of the punishment, as we said, Nathan tells David that this baby that is going to be born is going to die. And when that baby is born, it lives for a week, 7 days, and that baby dies. But after it's born, for those 7 days, the Bible tells us in 2 Samuel how David spent that whole week fasting and praying and begging God for that baby's life. His servants go in and they're trying to get him to eat and trying to get him to take care of himself, and David refuses and he pushes them away, and he spends that week fasting and praying and begging God for the baby's life. But the baby dies. And the servants have just spent 7 days begging him and trying to get him to eat and being refused and pushed away. And so none of them wants to tell David that the baby just died. And they're all in there and, they're saying, I don't want to tell him, you tell him. And I don't want to tell him, you tell him. And they're all going around and no one wants to tell David what has happened. And David picks up on what's going on and that the baby has died. And when he finds out, he gets himself up, he cleans himself up, and then the Bible tells us he goes to the house of the Lord and he worships God, and he spends time worshiping. And when he's done there, he comes home and he eats. And his servants are astonished. They can't believe what they just saw, because David has spent all this time pushing them away and begging God, and then the baby dies, and then he just kind of gets up and goes on like nothing happened almost, and he's worshiping God. And so David's response to them in 2 Samuel 12, in verses 22 and 23, and David says, "While the child was yet alive, I fasted and wept. For I said, who can tell whether God will be gracious to me, that the child may live? But now he is dead. Wherefore should I fast? Can I bring him back again? I shall go to him, but he shall not return to me." See, David knew that this was a result of his own sin and his own mistakes. And even though the result wasn't what he had wanted, he completely trusted God that God was going to work it out. He spent all that time fasting, praying, begging God, because, as we said, he'd had that experience before where God has delivered him. And then he got a result, and it wasn't what he wanted. But he still said, you know what? I trust God, and I know that he knows what's best for me, and I know that he's looking out for me, and I know that he takes care of me. So even though this baby died, I'm still going to go and I'm going to worship and thank God for the way that he looks out for me and provides for me and takes care of me. and he could accept the outcome, even though it wasn't what he wanted. And I think this is a good example of why David is called a man after God's heart, because he completely trusted God, and he was willing to pour himself out to God and be honest with God in the difficult times, in the hard times, and call out to God as he said, God, where are you? You're not here, God, and you're supposed to be. Where are you? I need you, and I have to have you, God. And even though he has doubts, and even though he feels lonely and abandoned, and even though he feels like God has left, he's still saying, in spite of all this, God, I know you're going to take care of me, and I know you're going to provide. And I'm going to thank you when you do. And even when it turns out the way he doesn't want it to turn out, and even when it turns out that the baby has died, he's still able to get up and worship God and thank God and say, God, you provided, and you're going to provide again. So in your own life, when you have the same feelings and the same things David was going through, and you're feeling like God has left you, and you're feeling like you're the only one, and you're feeling like there's nobody out there that can understand, and you feel abandoned, and you feel like there's no way out, it's okay to feel like that. That's normal reactions. Those are human reactions. But the difference is how you go from there. What do you do with those feelings? Do you listen to Satan? Do you turn from God? Do you say, I'm not worthy to go back to God because I had these? God's not going to accept me back because I doubted him and I thought he was gone. So it'd be better for me to go the other way off on my own. Or do you go the example we got from David and instead turn to God and plead and beg with God to show up, to be there, to provide for you, to give you deliverance, to bring you victory over whatever it is that's pulling you down? Do you say, God, I know you haven't provided it, but I know you have in the past, and I know you can do it again, just like David did? Because all of us have something that we're going through, some problems we're going through, some issues that are going on. Whether you've had it in the past, you're going through it now. If not, you're going to have it again in the future. Some dark times, some storms in your life, some times where it's going to feel like there's no way out. But you need to turn to God in those times. Don't turn away, turn to him, run to him, cling on to him, grab hold of him. Tell him that I know you can get me through it. And lean on some of those past experiences where you've gone through it in the past and God has delivered you. Go back to those. Hold on to them. Keep them fresh in your mind. Spend the time with God. If you're going through those times, encourage you, don't turn away from God. Don't forget about him. Don't give up. Run to him, be honest with him, talk to him, because, as we said, he already knows, right? He knows how you're feeling. He knows you have those feelings. You don't need to hide from him. You don't need to pretend they're not there. You don't need to sugarcoat it. Be real with God and be honest with him and tell him how you're feeling. And pour yourself out to him. That's what he's there for. He wants to listen to you. He wants to hear from you. He wants to be there to help you. So take advantage of it. You have a resource of the creator of the universe who desires to have a relationship with you and desires to be there and provide and bring you through. So take advantage of it. Go to him and do it. But if you don't even have God in your life to begin with, you might not even understand how that could even work, and you might not even understand what I'm even talking about. And if you don't have that in your life, you can get it. You can accept God into your life. You can bring him into your life so that you can have this same relationship with him and have a relationship with someone who wants to bring you through and help you out. But you got to have that relationship first. And if you don't have that, if you don't know what that means, if you're confused about it, we would be happy to talk to you about it after the service or in a minute here when we have an invitation time, and myself or Pastor Jay or anyone else, we'd be happy to show you how to have a relationship with God so that you can run to him in those times. And if you do have that relationship, don't push it away. Go to him. So we're going to spend a minute in prayer, and the worship team is going to be coming back up here in a second. And we're going to have an invitation time. And take the time to think about your life, to examine your life. And especially if you're feeling right now, going through those times where you're feeling abandoned and feeling alone. And think about, have I been pushing God away, or have I been running to Him? And if you've been pushing Him away, maybe you need to decide, now I need to switch and go towards Him. Or maybe you have been kind of going towards Him, but you're kind of sitting on the fence. Take the time today to commit fully to run towards Him and embrace Him. And you can do that right where you are in your seat. You can come up front here and pray up here if you want, and have someone pray with you if you want. You could do that wherever you are. That's one of the great things about God, is He's everywhere, and you can be with Him wherever you are. But if you go home without getting it right, there's a chance that you start to get distracted and you turn away from it. You forget to do it, and you get distracted with whatever you're going to do for lunch today, or enjoying soaking up the sun, or whatever celebrations with family you're doing this weekend, and you forget about it and you turn away from it. So don't turn away from it. Get it right today. Go to God today. Let's bow and we'll have the worship team come. God, we just thank you for your provision.